Laboratory results that appear perfectly normal can exist in a body that feels anything but, a paradox that leaves millions of patients questioning their own sanity while their biological reality remains uncaptured by the numbers. If you've ever walked out of a clinic holding a clean lab report while your body was screaming for help, you've encountered the profound gap between clinical data and lived experience. It's a disconnect that is especially visible and especially dangerous in the world of adrenal insufficiency. We tend to treat blood tests like a definitive verdict, a biological truth. But in reality, a lab test is less like a comprehensive biography and more like a single grainy frame of a high-speed film. It tells you where the characters are standing in 1 millisecond, but it can't tell you the plot, the tension, or what happened 5 minutes before the shutter clicked. Today, we're going deep into the science of why your labs might be lying to you by omission, exploring the statistical quirks of normal ranges and the dynamic, rhythmic nature of hormones like cortisol that make a single snapshot almost impossible to interpret without context.
Part 1. The statistical illusion of normal. When we see the word normal on a lab report, we naturally assume it means optimal or healthy. But normal in medicine is a statistical term, not a clinical guarantee. Most people would be surprised to learn how these reference ranges are actually built. Scientists take a large group of people, usually at least 120 individuals, who are apparently healthy. They test them, look at the spread of results, and then they throw away the top 2.5% and the bottom 2.5%. The middle 95% becomes the reference range. This means, by definition, 5% of perfectly healthy people will always fall outside the normal range. Conversely, it means you can be very ill but still fall within that middle 95% if your personal healthy baseline was at the very top of the range and has now dropped to the bottom. For a hormone like cortisol, the range is often incredibly wide. A normal morning cortisol might range from 5 to 25 micrograms per deciliter. If your body naturally thrives at 22, and you're now sitting at 6, your lab result is technically normal, but your biological reality is that you are operating at a 70% deficit. The lab doesn't know your history. It only knows the average of the crowd. Statistics describe populations, but they don't define individuals. We are not biologically identical, and the assumption that one range fits all ignores the vast diversity in our genetic blueprints, our metabolic rates, and our unique internal set points.
Part 2. The dynamic dance of cortisol. The second reason for the gap between labs and reality is that human biology is not a static state, it's a dynamic process. This is particularly true for the adrenal system. Cortisol isn't just a stress hormone, it's the body's primary rhythm setter. In a healthy person, cortisol follows a strict circadian rhythm. It peaks sharply about 30 minutes after you wake up to give you the energy to start the day. Then it slowly cascades downward, reaching its lowest point around midnight so you can sleep. It's also pulsatile, meaning it's released in little bursts throughout the day rather than a steady stream. When a doctor orders a single morning blood draw, they're trying to catch that peak. But what if you had a late night? What if your sleep cycle is shifted? What if the stress of the needle stick itself caused a temporary spike? A single data point can't tell the doctor if your rhythm is flat, meaning you stay low all day, or flipped, meaning you're low in the morning and high at night. In patients with adrenal insufficiency, the complexity doubles.
these individuals rely on replacement medications like hydrocortisone or prednisone, which have their own half-lives. The medication hits the bloodstream, peaks, and then clears out. If a lab is drawn 4 hours after a dose, it might look great, but 2 hours later, the patient might be crashing as the medication wears off. The lab captures the peak of the drug, but the patient lives in the valleys between the doses. Without seeing the whole curve, the normal result is just a misleading fragment of a much more chaotic day.
Part 3. Clinical data versus biological reality.
We have to distinguish between clinical data, the measurable numbers, and biological reality, the functional state of your cells. You can have enough cortisol in your blood to satisfy a lab test, but if that cortisol isn't being absorbed correctly, or if your cells aren't responding to it, you will still feel symptomatic. In the world of adrenal insufficiency, absorption is a massive variable. Things like heat, exercise, a minor cold, or even what you ate for breakfast can change how much medication actually makes it into your system. If you're stressed or ill, your body's demand for cortisol skyrockets. A lab test taken during a calm moment might show you have adequate levels for a person sitting on a sofa, but those same levels are dangerously insufficient for a person trying to navigate a high-pressure meeting or a flu virus. This is why endocrinologists often rely on dynamic testing, like the ACTH stimulation test, rather than just baseline draws. They are trying to see how the system reacts under pressure. However, even these tests have limits. They measure the capacity of the adrenal gland to respond, but they don't measure the daily lived experience of the patient. The numbers are a map, but the territory is the territory. When the map and the territory don't match, it's usually the map that's incomplete.
Part 4. Reclaiming the narrative. So, how do we bridge this gap? It starts with acknowledging that your symptoms are data points just as valid as a lab result. Clinical judgment, the ability of a doctor to look at a patient's history, their physical appearance, and their patterns over time, is still the most powerful tool in medicine. If you're living with adrenal insufficiency and your labs are fine, but you're struggling to stand up without getting dizzy, or you're experiencing extreme brain fog, that is a biological fact that demands attention. Patients can help bridge this gap by tracking their own internal labs. Keeping a log of when you take your medication, when your energy dips, and what external stressors were present provides the context that a single blood draw lacks. Instead of saying, "My labs were normal," we should be asking, "Is this result normal for me given what I was doing that day?" We have to move away from the idea that a number on a page is the ultimate truth of our health. Modern medicine is a miracle, and lab tests save lives every day. But they are tools, not gods. They are meant to support the clinical picture, not replace it. Your experience of your own body is the primary source of truth, and the numbers are there to help explain that truth, not to argue against it. When we understand the limitations of the snapshots, we can start looking at the whole movie of our health, and that's where the real healing begins. Share this with someone who's currently navigating the confusion of normal lab results.